It's Friday evening, you're done with work for the week, and there's 2 whole days for you to relax and unwind. A whole 48 hours are stretched in front of you, more than enough time to beat a whole host of games. But you do have to sleep, eat, get other tasks done, and honestly just do way too much for what are supposed to be days of rest. Let's say that you do have a fairly open weekend though, and you're wanting to beat the main story of an RPG in that time. Well, here are 10 role-playing games that can be completed in under 20 hours. I've also tried to ensure that this list has a lot of variety in it, so I'm making a guarantee right now that at least one of these games will appeal to you. If you make it to the end of the list and none of the games are to your taste, please give the video a dislike. That's right, I'm asking for dislikes. But if you do end up enjoying these recommendations, give us a like instead. I'm curious to see how the ratio ends up. First on the list is a classic, the original Final Fantasy. We're now up to the 16th mainline entry in the series, with more spin-offs and remakes and other things than I can count. While the modern games can easily eat up dozens or hundreds of hours, the original is a relatively quick one to beat. For each of these entries, I'll be including the stats from how long to beat, so that you can not only see how long it takes to power through the main story, but also how much extra time you could be spending in the game, if you so choose. And for this game in particular, I can confirm the accuracy of the times to some extent, as this is one of only 2 games that I've 100%ed on Steam, and my total playtime clocks in at just under 20 hours. Enough of talking about time, let's actually discuss what the game itself is. The original Final Fantasy is a fantasy role-playing game where the 4 Warriors of Light are looking to restore light to the elemental crystals and save their world from destruction. This game is pure refined FF goodness. Turn-based combat, different jobs with different abilities, and extra areas unlocked as you gain new vehicles. It also has a complete nonsense plot, which I won't spoil here as it's worth experiencing firsthand. The Pixel remaster version of this game is the one I've played through, and I'd highly recommend it. It makes this game from the 80s look surprisingly pretty, and provides an easy playing experience, which sadly won't be the case for every game on this list. On to the next one though, Fable Anniversary. This is another remaster, but feel free to go for the classic if you can't get this one. Fable's another fantasy role-playing game, this time from a third-person perspective. You start the game as a young boy, living in a small village in the land of Albion. Once your village is destroyed, you are set on your path to becoming a hero, being brought into the Heroes Guild and trained up for years. I say that you're set on the path to becoming a hero, but probably the best selling point of the game is its alignment system. Depending on what actions you take in the game, you can become more good or more evil. Not only will this affect how NPCs treat you, but will also drastically change your appearance. This change of appearance also can occur with your stats. A strong hero will be muscular, and a spell-focused hero may start to see arcane patterns appear on their skin. If you're looking for a fantasy RPG which doesn't take itself too seriously and is willing to joke around with you, then Fable Anniversary is probably your best choice on this list. And with the new Fable game being released later this year, now's a great time to go back and revisit the original. Next up on the list is Death's Door. In this game you play as a Grim Reaper and as a crow at the same time. I don't need to keep talking, do I? Surely you're sold on it by now. Alright, for actual details, this is an isometric game with a focus on story, puzzle solving and combat. The game draws inspiration from both The Legend of Zelda and Dark Souls, and it really shows. While combat often has a Souls-like feel, the more cartoony graphics and far less depressing world, despite all being about death, does help to make it enjoyable to play through. While the game can be punishing at times, with both a very limited health pool and the need to accurately dodge incoming attacks, the fact it's nice and short stops it from feeling overly punishing. Even if you struggle a little with certain fights, once you do beat them, you've made significant progress through the story, which is something I think matters in a Souls-like style game. If you're looking for a blend of dark combat and bright environments, then this is the game for you. And now for something completely different. Confrontation is a tactical RPG, which I played for half an hour and have no intention of going back to. It plays like an RTS, has incredibly dense lore at every turn, and even comes with a little army painter, for some reason. While this isn't my kind of game, I wanted to include it as it is something really different from the other ones on the list. While this is technically another fantasy RPG, it has many scientific elements woven into its plot, which help to also give it a little bit of sci-fi style flavouring. In this game, you build up a party of 4 characters who seek to destroy the creations of the alchemists of Durs. Presumably because the creations are evil, but who knows? Morality is a complicated subject that should rarely be looked at in a purely black and white terms. While you only have control of 4 different characters, there are a total of 12 classes these characters can be, and a large part of the game is carefully selecting the composition of your party in order to best tackle the upcoming challenges. Like I said before, this game wasn't really my flavour, but if you like a little RTS in your RPG, then this might just be worth a look for you. Something which is much more my speed is Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. This is a first-person action role-playing game, which lets you kick your enemies. You know how the Dishonored games have a lot of fun ways to deal with enemies which feel really satisfying? Well, this is what Arcane was making before that series. Imagine all that smart level design of the Dishonored franchise, but instead of the focus being on giving you several different paths to reach your destination, that same effort has been expended on putting things to kick enemies into, off of, and through. The game does technically have more to it than kicking things, but that is the key selling point in my opinion. As for the story, you play as Sareth, a young man who has been trained as both warrior and mage. Your journey will start with the simple delivery of a magic crystal, through to the slaying of a mighty Cyclops, and eventually to deciding the fate of the world forever. This combination of both warrior and mage, or might and magic if you will, really helps expand the gameplay. While you can lean entirely towards one and ignore the other, most of the time you will be using a combination of powerful weapons along with devastating spells, in order to dispatch your foes in a wide variety of ways. Or you can just kick them, don't forget that. Combat really is the main selling point for this game, but it's another one where the short length of it all helps to ensure that it doesn't get too old or repetitive at any point. On to the shortest game in this whole list, ORPG. This is an RPG Maker game, which does mean it's fairly basic in terms of looks and gameplay, but the real gem of it is the structure. In all the past games on the list, you play as the hero, whose quest is to save the world they live in. In this game, the heroes have failed, and rather than playing as them, you play as characters they meet after they fail to defeat the big bad. Getting to play as the characters who would normally be NPCs is a real nice change of pace. You'll start off as Gobby the Goblin, and get a little glimpse into what the life of a generic enemy in the Evil Fortress is like. Spoilers, it's pretty terrible. But Gobby isn't the only character you'll play as. You'll get to control several different people throughout, including an old woman. Pretty exciting, right? In terms of actual mechanics, I do quite like what this game does. Equipment can be upgraded, and exploring will give you more materials to ensure everything's in tip-top shape. But given that the game is pretty small, there's not much of an incentive on hoarding items, like is normally the case with most RPGs. While combat is fairly straightforward, I do enjoy the range of abilities, and the way that calling in allies works, with it depending on the personality of that character as to how much they will actually help you. This definitely isn't the best game on the list, but it's short, very cheap, costing only a couple of quid, and provides something different from the norm. Check this out if you're looking for something which isn't like other things you've played. Remember how earlier I talked about how Death's Door was inspired by Dark Souls? Well, Mortal Shell goes twice as hard with the inspiration, as this game is so Dark Souls. The dark atmosphere, punishing combat, and big boss fights really do give big Dark Souls energy. Hell, if you weren't familiar with either game, you could easily mistake them for one another. But despite saying this, I don't believe it's a negative. If you like Souls games and want a good short one to try out, then Mortal Shell is the perfect choice for you. The third-person combat will feel familiar, and the atmosphere will fit perfectly with your vibe. As for what it does a little differently, shells would be the main thing here. Shells are the remains of defeated warriors, which you will find in the world and then inhabit. These shells essentially function as different classes, but instead of having to choose them at the start of a game with no knowledge of what's going on, you instead get to find and swap between these shells in order to use different playstyles and abilities. Or if you want a real challenge, you can go shellless and try and beat the whole game without being hit once. Certainly not something I'd recommend on your first playthrough, but I do always like a solid challenge option. As well as offering different gameplay depending on the shell you inhabit, they will also affect dialogue with NPCs, and each one also has its own backstory for you to uncover. Learning more about these shells will not only give you more of a story, but could also make you more powerful. I think you get it at this point. If you're a Souls-like fan, this game is for you. Otherwise, probably a miss. I think it's also worth noting that I believe this is the most modern of all the games on the list, meaning it can be found on all modern consoles nice and easy. From a modern sleeper hit to a modern classic, Undertale. I'm honestly not sure if I need to talk about this game at all. Undertale is one of those indie games which managed to achieve far more fame than many AAA titles. In the game, you play as a small human child who falls down into the Underground, a realm of monsters who have been banished there after a war broke out with the humans. Obviously, your presence here will cause many monsters to attack you, but the big thing about Undertale is that you don't need to fight back. You can look for other routes to resolve these conflicts instead. Sure, you could just go for flat-out combat, killing anyone who gets in your way, but you could also spare enemies, or even see if you could befriend them. The choices you make during battle will have drastic changes to the plot of the game, not only altering the ending itself, but also the environments you travel through as you play. Look, you know what this game is. I don't think I need to talk about it much more. If you're fed up with always having to kill enemies in your role-playing games, then Undertale will likely be your cup of tea. Enough of that pacifistic nonsense, let's get back to killing. Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor is, unsurprisingly, a game set in the world of Middle-earth, the lands featured in Lord of the Rings. In the game, you play as Talion, a ranger who defends the Black Gate of Mordor. During his watch, Sauron's forces attack and destroy the garrison. Talion loses his family, but instead of getting to die alongside them, his body becomes inhabited by Celebrimbor, the ancient elven smith who helped forge the One Ring. With the Wraith now inhabiting his body, the pair are able to seek revenge against the Dark Lord and his minions. The big selling point of this game isn't the main story though, it's the Nemesis system. The game is filled with orc captains who you will have to fight through, and the cool part is that they'll remember you. Win the fight, and they could come back, seeking revenge. If they kill you though, then once you return, they'll comment on it, and may adapt to be stronger in the future. On top of this, they all have various strengths and weaknesses, which you will have to contend with. While I do believe that the Nemesis system is improved upon vastly in the sequel, that's also a much longer game, so couldn't fit on this list. Honestly, this game barely fits here, but if you're more interested in just powering through the main story, especially if you're doing so in order to be caught up for the sequel, then you can potentially get through the game over the span of a weekend. On to the final entry in this list, Fallout. While all the sequels in the franchise are a fair bit longer, the original in the series can actually be completed in a relatively short amount of time. This classic post-apocalyptic RPG is an incredibly punishing isometric game, with a brilliant story and setting. You play as the Vault Dweller, an inhabitant of Vault 13 who has to head out into the wasteland to find a water chip in order to keep the vault up and running. In the irradiated desert, you will have to deal with giant wildlife, devious raiders, and the threat of the Master's super mutants. The original Fallout has a genuinely brilliant story, and I wish I was even mildly good at these old isometric RPGs, because then I'd actually get to beat this game for once. Instead, I'll leave it to those of you who are more suited to this style of game to finish. If you're a Fallout fan and want to see where the series originated, then you should be giving this game a chance. Additionally, if you're watching this video shortly after upload, all the classic Fallout games should be free on the Epic Games Store, so you can pick them up there if you're so inclined. And that was the list. As I said at the start of the video, if there were no games on the list you were interested in, leave a dislike. But if you made it this far and thought some of my suggestions were good, please do leave a like instead. Feel free to subscribe for more role-playing game videos, and also check out my Games in 2024 series, as it's some of my best content I've made in a real long time. As always, thanks for watching. Sarge out.